This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
Wind and Truth is over, and I have a few final bits that I've always wanted to get to but didn't in the top 5 and bottom 5 daily rankings. So first of all, I've got a culmination of those rankings, a summation of how everyone did in all 10 days, and now we have a top 10 and a bottom 10 listing, and this was done through the magic of a spreadsheet. So I'll get to that shortly, and then I also want to give some general commentary on the book. We'll do a full review on the channel later on. Some things that I was right on as I was going through, and some things that I was way off on, and then some final loose ends and plot theories and things that I feel are important and weren't really wrapped up and are worth just pointing out, as in the future we may see this. Number 1 spot was Szeth. It was his book. He got a lot of screen time and he was always hanging around the top 5. Really good all-around performance, and he was our top performing character. Number 2 was Shallan. Maybe a little surprising. I thought that Adolin might make his way up here. He appears shortly afterwards, but I think Shallan, carried by some really good early performances in the first days, that bolstered her score enough to make it all the way up to number 2. Number 3 spot was a tie going to Adolin and Dalinar. Both did a lot of really good things, and really no surprise to see them right at the top of the power rankings. That moves the next slot down to 5, and that's going to be Kaladin. Kaladin's another character I thought could be a little higher, but he didn't really do that much through the first 6 or 7 days, kind of just hanging around and having good vibes, and then he had a lot of cool moments at the end, so that wasn't quite enough to get him any higher than 5. Number 6 was Venli. I think Venli was maybe carried by what I thought would be a little bit more important. I gave her the top ranking on one of the days where she found the shard pool. I thought that would just be massive. It turns out it wasn't. I'll talk more about that later. So Venli comes here at number 6. Renarin 7. Renarin had a really good book, and he was really always doing positive things, kind of hanging around, maybe never got too far up the rankings, so he's down here at 7, but I was really impressed with Renarin's character. Number 8 was Navani. Navani was with Dalinar for most of his cool moments, didn't really have too much of, the big heroic moments at the end, so she's down here at 8, but solid book from her. Number 9 spot's going to Talon. Talon got full marks on that day where he held the breach, and that was really his only show up in the top 5 rankings, but that was enough to land him here at the number 9 spot. And then 10 was a tie between Odium, the power of Odium, and Taravangian, the holder of Odium. I gave Odium separate points in day 10, and then Taravangian was earning points throughout. I think Taravangian had a lot of pluses and a lot of minuses ultimately that landed here with only 4 positive points overall. Overall, the top ranking Szeth got 22, and then it was kind of a slow trickle down to 10 spot, which got 4. Okay, let's flip it over to the bottom 10 rankings. This is a little bit harder because there weren't quite as many consistent low performers, but the number 1 spot was really consistent and by far had the most points. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you won't be surprised that it's Abadai the Monarch with negative 20 points. This character was just hilariously bad, and I was not at all surprised to see that he got number 1. Number 2 was the Stormfather, who got bullied around by Dalinar quite a bit and ultimately didn't really do anything very positive. Number 3 was Gavinor, who had a really crappy day, really crappy life, and this is a character that I'm fascinated to see in the next 6 to 10 books. Number 4 spot is, funny enough, a 3-way tie between 3 immortal beings: wit, cultivation, and honor. None of them really got what they wanted. I'm talking about the power of honor, by the way, here. And they all kind of had, bad performances and are ultimately in weird spots by the end of the book. That drops us down to the 7 spot, which is a tie between the Mink and Mraize. The Mink is a character that I don't care for, and I was really kind of confused why he was included in this book and what ultimately his role even is. I would not be sad at all to see this character just kind of cut from future books. And then Mraize gets his butt kicked and fails, and maybe should have got more negative marks, but it only occurred in a couple days. So both these characters tie for negative 6 points. And then shortly behind a tie for the final spot, it's the number 9 spot, but I'm not going to do all the way down to 10. We've got a lot of characters already with negative 5 points, which means that a lot of these characters just showed up for one day and were the worst performers. So this tie is between Sigzil, 12124, Xyle, Yasna, and Fen. 12124, Xyle, and Fen were all, I think, bottom performers on one specific day. And then Yasna and Sigzil kind of bounced around, some good marks, some bad marks, but neither one of the characters really did too well overall. Sigzil, I felt really bad for putting him here because I love Sigzil after the end of this book, But ultimately, like each day he was, things were against him, and his overall ending was really bad. So the character himself, love, but ultimately, results were not great. Okay, Wind and Truth, how did I feel about it overall? I really liked it, and I'm going to be pretty forgiving because there were some things that I didn't like, so maybe we'll get those out of the way first. First of all, I felt that it could have used more editing. There were a lot of modern phrasings and words and colloquialisms that were used that really kind of took you out of the action, and honestly, I feel like if you just gave me a week to read through it and change like 40 to 50 different like minor things, it would be a really big improvement for the book. So kind of disappointed that Brandon didn't do that. This actually got brought up in the State of Sanderson Reddit thread, and he responded to it and gave some thoughtful remarks and was like open to criticism. Ultimately, he said he tries to like interpret what's being said in Roshar and these foreign languages into English, and that's why he feels that he does more of a modern take than like a George R. R. Martin or a Tolkien. I see where he's coming from, but I kind of disagree at the same time because I feel like there's a lot of easy things that you could just go through and improve. Like when Syl calls someone a creep or a tool, or Kaladin says, I'm game or I'm down, and just small things like that. Like it takes you out of it for a second because you're like, wait, is this Roshar or is this Earth? Like, what is this? Why are they talking this way? And then especially, gosh, when Syl is talking about her private parts, having a chol, like, what is this? This is just awkward. And I know Brandon has this kind of like dad humor at times, but there's a few times where it's just too much, and I feel like no one appreciates it, and really, like, let's just eliminate this and the book would be so much better. So that's my soapbox of things that I think could do better with Wind and Truth. There's other things like his show don't tell writing could be improved. That takes a little bit more, and Brandon also kind of talked about like, look, we've got to pump these books out, and his longtime editor Moshe left, and he does have a full-time editing team, so I don't know, like maybe we need to give them a little more time to do things, but at the same time, like he really needs to get them out in a short amount of time, and it's a massive project, which I totally respect. So that all aside, I still loved the book because it delivered on like the Sanderson-y stuff. It's a very Brandon Sanderson book in a lot of ways, so you shouldn't be surprised that you're getting some of the negatives and some of the positives, and the positives were awesome. It fulfilled a lot of the character arcs. It had some great character moments. It focused on the mental health things in really refreshing and fun ways. Although sometimes, like, maybe it was a little on the nose when we're talking about not being a thing and you can choose for yourself and nothing's normal. Like, these are very much like therapy 101 and mental health 101 things, and I feel like people kind of like understand these ideas now in 2024, so maybe we could use a little more nuance and subtext as we talk about them. But again, that's not terribly different than previous Stormlight books. Maybe you could argue that it could have been done a little bit better in this book, and I would accept that argument. Anyway, but overall, I'm going to say the positives for it with the big Sander Lanch at the end and all these things coming together, and how much I appreciated the way that a lot of the character arcs tied up and a lot of these big moments worked out for me, like all, top marks in that section. And that's really what I'm reading a Sanderson book for, in addition for all the world building and the lore and everything that goes into that, and the intricacy of the plots and the details. These things are awesome, and this is what I love Brandon for. So I accept the negatives, and if you can't, then there's other authors out there for you. I thought it achieved like a 8 out of 10, so very much above average. Did it like completely blow me away? No. And at times yes, but overall maybe a no. And I haven't thought about too much where it sits in the Stormlight Archive, but like an initial glance, I'm going to say it's third behind Words of Radiance, and then Way of Kings, and then probably Wind of Truth, Oathbringer, and Rhythm of War. Just 2 final comments on this. Some chapters and some of the writing was really good. Like, I fully believe that if Brandon wanted to, he could sit down and take 5 years to write these books out, and it would be just top-notch prose and everything. I do think some of it suffers because of the quickness that he needs to do it at. But some chapters, like that chapter where everyone was not asleep and it bounced from viewpoint to viewpoint, and there was symmetry in the writing, and like that type of stuff, that's amazing. And if he could just incorporate a little more of that into his writing, which maybe takes a bit more time and And overall, like, the prose is not bad except for just the few things that jump out at you and you're like, that's awkward. So maybe if we could just take a little bit more time, a little more focus on this, like if Brandon could maybe accept this needs to happen, because I don't think he really fully does, but maybe we need to like continue to let him know as a fan base in a nice way that we would appreciate this, because a lot of the feedback that I'm seeing is like, let's make it a little more immersive and like just cut these things out and it would be better. And then the final comment is, I did not think that it was going to get to this point by the end of book 5. I thought it would be a big ending. I thought I would not expect things, but to have no Stormlight and have Dalinar completely die, or does he? We'll talk about that in a second. And have all of our characters kind of like scattered to the wind, and Odium mostly win, or does he again? But still control 90% of Roshar. I didn't expect we would go quite this far. I didn't expect Brandon would pull all of these levers. I thought he might pull some punches, but he really doesn't. Like, this is almost a Mistborn Era 1 type of ending, and I really appreciate the book for that. Okay, I'm just going to rapid fire go through a bunch of loose ends, things that I think are not tied up, and maybe like a few thoughts on what I think they might be going towards. So there's a few pieces of honor that are split off at the end before Odium grabs it for himself and becomes Retribution. I don't know what this is. Let me know in the comments. Honor, so Dalinar like takes this gamble, and Honor's going to now be like educated, and is this going to work? Because Odium's going to have Honor now like under his thumb for a very long time, and he's got a little bit of Dalinar imprinted upon him, and he's being told to grow up a little bit, but is this going to work? It's a big gamble, so this is going to be huge. And I think it's going to tie into what seems like we're going, like a big thing that we're going towards in the Cosmere is this mistake of destroying Adonalsium and having shards with single intents, and ultimately like just having one quality is going to be bad for your god. And by the end of the Cosmere, are we going to then be able to like reform Adonalsium? Probably not. I think that would be too obvious. But maybe we will make some of these shards grow up a little bit, and Honor will actually be honorable, and maybe Odium will control its passions. Some shards I think will not be redeemed, but I think that's kind of where we're going in the shards learning and having intents that are both positive and negative. Okay, Dalinar's soul, is it just into the beyond, or has someone else taken it? I think someone else has taken it, because Retribution, Taravangian, tries to grab it, and then the power tells him, sorry, someone else has claim to Dalinar. Who is this? Is it another shard that Dalinar has like espoused the quality of, and they have a claim to him, like maybe a Valor, this mysterious thing? Or is it whoever Noadon is? And that's going to be the next thing. So Noadon is weird, right? In the visions, he knows who Midius is, and he clearly knows that Dalinar is there, and he's like outside of time. So he's got to be some kind of immortal god being of some kind. Is it just another shard? Or could it be that, and I appreciate Discord friend for this, could it be that Noadon is Adonalsium and the Iriali are right, and Adonalsium is still alive in some degree and knows wit and is just like another world hopper and immortal and is jumping around? Dalinar also talks about having another god, like this feeling of positivity and warmth. I think it's mostly in the Oathbringer prologue that we see this in. And so who's this other god? This never got resolved. Is this also like the effects of Noadon? And could this then be Adonalsium? Retribution talks about heading to Scadrial. That would be awesome. I would love it if Retribution went to Scadrial for Mistborn Era 3. We need more tie-ins, right? And Mistborn Era 2 is not my favorite, but I love Stormlight. So if we could tie these two things together, I would be so excited to hear that this is happening. On the flip side, I didn't love the Blackthorn Avatar thing, and is this going to become now the regent of Roshar? I would massively prefer if it was El who became the regent, who I think is a much more interesting villain. Taravangian has Kharbranth in the spiritual realm as his little secret. Could his power rebel against him like we saw Honor's power start to rebel against Tanavast? And speaking of Honor, what's the state of it here as it's been incorporated into Retribution, but kind of pauses for a second, and clearly like the effects of Dalinar's imprint are still on it. There's no Stormlight in Roshar anymore. This is going to be massive for books 6 through 10. I predict that we'll get Stormlight back at some point. Otherwise, we're wasting all of our radiant powers and all the work that's been done there. So I think it's going to come back at some point. I think it's going to be a huge thing when it does. But for now, we don't have it at all. The tower is sealed. Navani and the sibling have made some kind of sacrifice, and they're in stasis to do this. And as a result, we can't get in and out in the spiritual realm. And also, we can't, this is not because of the tower being sealed, but we can't get in and out of the cognitive realm to the spiritual realm, and that leaves Shallan trapped. And so we're very much isolated here, and that's going to be huge going forward. We've got our new heralds, and they are in a bigger time dilation than the rest of Roshar. So it'll be interesting to see how Kaladin interacts with his new friends. And speaking of Kaladin, we never got a resolution with Moash. The last we saw him, he was almost killing Sigzil and Vienta, and then really nothing else. No even like little bit at the end in the epilogue, which I was maybe a little confused by, or maybe not in the epilogue, but in the final chapter. Usually Brandon points to where the characters are going, but just nothing with Moash. So I guess Moash is around for the long haul, and that makes me expect that him and Kaladin will have some kind of final battle, like at the end of days in the Cosmere. I'm super interested in Gavnor. The amount of trauma here in his backstory is insane, and Brandon could write this into a very interesting character. Shallan is pregnant and stuck in Shadesmar, massive for her character. This will be where we pick up for her. Olive Roshar is in this time dilation, which I think explains just now that everything is starting to come together more. I think Brandon needs to get the timelines together, and it explains why there's maybe not as much back and forth with Roshar during Mistborn Era 2, and that maybe puts us to the same level in Mistborn Era 3. I need to take a look at the timeline there. Sigzil has immediately now tied into Sunlit Man. I know there's a big time jump in between that, but he's got Ox and he's got the Dawn Shard, and this is essentially, who his character is, minus jumping around for years and years and years. Both Mishram and Ja'anat, I thought they'd be more important in this book. They're not, but they are now free and will be more interesting in 6 through 10. Renarin and Relaine are going to be like these emissaries to the Singers, and both characters are now very interesting going forward. So we know where Retribution's shard pool is, but it wasn't important at all in the end of book 5, which I thought it would be as soon as they found it. It's not, however, must be important for 6 through 10. Lift has decided to grow up a little bit. She's going to train underneath Vasher/Xyle, and she's now got a 10-year gap to do so. So Lift was never really a favorite character of mine, but I am interested to see where she gets to after maturing a little bit. Wit got kicked out and is back on Scadrial, but wants to get back to Roshar, and also really wants to make contact with Valor, who sounds cool as this dragon god. So I hope that we get Valor, because there's been a lot of little hints that Valor is cool, and this must be happening in the future, right? We got the Rissyn interlude. Now she's off traveling the Cosmere on her ship, I guess. We know that she's holding a Dawn Shard, and she's never going to meet up with Wit again, although now that Wit doesn't hold the Dawn Shard, maybe they will. Never really cared for the Mink, but he's off there in her Daz, and I guess something will happen with him in books 6 through 10. And then finally, what do we make of the whole Silladin thing? It was maybe going to be a romance. There were maybe hints at it, but also I wasn't really getting those vibes by the end. I don't want this to be a thing because they feel like too much of partners in a non-romantic way, and it just feels strange. But I don't know, maybe Brandon could write this into books 6 through 10. I would prefer him not to, though. Okay, before the book and during the book, I thought that these things would happen. They didn't. I thought that Dalinar would survive but become Odium's vassal and go out and destroy the Cosmere. That didn't happen. He died, or kind of did. I thought the Ghostbloods would be more important for this book, but ultimately they were a little disappointing of a plotline. I thought the Stormfather was fake or something, and this goes back to when the prologue was first released and we had this Storm Faker theory, and it just seemed really weird how he was acting. Ultimately, it was for different reasons, and that was done pretty well, but I was way off on that one. I did not expect the level of change that we got to by the end of the book. I thought it would be slightly less. I would have banked on Adolin dying. That didn't happen. It seemed like Adolin was a good kill-off candidate. Instead, it was Dalinar whose loss is going to be the biggest. And then finally, like I said, I thought that shard pool would be super important when we found it, but ultimately is kind of a nothing for this book. And then what was I correct on? I thought Odium would win. He did win in the short term, but not in the long term. Or I guess it's a we'll see in the long term, but disadvantaged for now. The Chanarach theory that we kind of knew was happening after the prologue came out, and there were just so many hints for it. that totally happened. I thought it was done really well in the book, but maybe a little disappointing that we kind of already knew that it was going to happen because there was just so much evidence for it. I've already gone on a soapbox saying I feel like it was a big mistake to release that prologue early, because without that, we wouldn't have had this like 99% confirmed as much as it was. But, it happened. And then the suckling child Gavinor theory, that also came to fruition. I never really liked that. I didn't really want it to be true, but deep down I kind of knew it was going to be because it lined up really well. But I thought it was done fine. I thought it was done well because it wasn't... Dalinar didn't really have to choose between killing him and didn't. He went with a third way, and this like spurred it in that direction. And I'm really fascinated to where this character is going to go. So I was good with it. As I was reading, I always knew it was not an unmade in Shinobar. It just seems so obvious how much we were hammering. It's an unmade, it's an unmade, it's an unmade. And with Brandon, it's not going to be an unmade when we get that much level of attention to it. I never really identified who it was. I was kind of thinking like Cultivation, Night Watcher type of thing. Probably should have once I saw the Spren that were brought into the physical realm and being tortured, but didn't put that together in time. The Oath Pact was reformed, and this has been a long time theory of mine. It was reformed in a different way. I thought it was going to be reformed with all 10 of our new characters. I guess we would need a Dustbringer somewhere in there, so not sure exactly who the 10 would have been, but I thought it would be reformed with more new characters. Instead, it's Kaladin plus our old heralds, but I like that it happened. And then finally, as I was reading, I knew that Kaladin and Adolin would survive because of the way that their arcs were going. And once Adolin lost his leg, I was like, okay, this is the next step in his journey. Brandon can't kill him now because now he's got a new direction for his character arc. Although, weirdly, losing a leg wasn't as big of a focus for Adolin as it probably should have been. I don't really think that was handled super well as someone with a disability. No, if you lose your leg, that's a massive focus. Instead, Aelin's like, I lost my leg, whatever. I can still deal with it. Maybe a little disappointed in that. All right, that's a wrap. I've had a massive focus on Wind and Truth for the last few days. Loved the book, and really kind of this massive show hole now for me with the book being over, so I've got to find my next thing. If you want to chat with us at Phantology, you can do that. Links to join our Discord are below. We'd love to have you jump in and let us know what your Wind and Truth theories are, what I got wrong. I know I probably missed some details. I'm not the biggest cosmere nerd, but I'm a pretty big cosmere nerd and proud to be. However, I don't know all the details, so let me know what I got wrong, and we'd love to have you join in and chat with us more.